"You have until end of business today to hand over your access badge and leave the premises," her brother-in-law said, loud enough for the entire conference room to hear. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Aubrey Weston kept her hands flat on the table. 12 people were watching her. Some looked at the ceiling. A few stared at their coffee cups. Only 2 seemed to be enjoying themselves. Her sister's husband, Philip Crane, who sat at the far end with his arms crossed like he'd just won something, and his assistant Tara, who was barely hiding a smile behind her notepad. Aubrey had worked at Weston Architecture Group for 11 years. She had poured herself into the company her mother founded from nothing, had turned down better offers to stay, had chosen loyalty when it would have been so much easier to leave, and now Philip was firing her in front of the full leadership team. "On what grounds?" she asked. Philip slid a folder across the table without looking at her. "Failure to meet project benchmarks, insubordination, misuse of company resources." He let the silence stretch before adding, "It's all documented." Aubrey didn't open the folder. She had already seen these documents, or something close to them. 4 months ago she had found a draft version on a shared drive she technically wasn't supposed to access. That was when she had stopped being surprised and started being careful. "These are fabricated," said Hugh Calloway, the head of contracts who had been with the firm longer than almost anyone. He was one of 3 people in the room who looked genuinely upset. Aubrey's work on the Meridian project alone brought in more revenue than the last 2 fiscal years combined. "Your concern is noted," Philip said without turning his head. He looked back at Aubrey. "Do you have anything to say?" She looked at him for a long moment. This man her sister had married 6 years ago. This man who had inserted himself into the firm, who had slowly positioned himself as the face of a company that didn't bear his name, that had nothing to do with his history. This man who had spent the last 8 months trying to consolidate power before he did exactly this. There was so much she could have said. She could have told the room about the contractor kickbacks he'd been running through a shell LLC out of Denver. She could have mentioned the zoning documents he'd falsified on the Hargrove project. She could have pulled out her phone and shown them the string of emails she'd screenshotted 5 months ago, when she first understood what she was actually dealing with. But that wasn't the plan. "I have nothing to say," Aubrey replied. "Except this. I hope you've thought this through carefully, Philip." Something moved behind his eyes, just for a moment. Then Tara touched his arm and it was gone. "End of business," he repeated. "Starting now." Aubrey nodded. She stood up, pushed in her chair and walked out of the room. Her heels were quiet on the concrete floor. She had worn flats to every meeting for the past 6 months without thinking about it, but today she had worn heels deliberately. She wanted to hear herself leave. At her desk, she pulled out the single box she had carried in that morning, under the guise of bringing extra supplies. She had been removing the things that mattered for weeks. Her mother's first project renderings, the award plaques she cared about, the reference books that had belonged to the firm before she arrived. The box she filled now held a coffee mug she didn't love, some pens, a calendar she'd never looked at, props. "Aubrey." She turned. It was Dominic Reyes from the structural team, one of the few people she actually considered a friend inside the office. He looked like he hadn't slept. "This is wrong, everyone knows it." "I know," she said quietly. She wanted to tell him not to worry. She couldn't, not yet. Security. 2 contractors she recognized, both clearly uncomfortable, walked her to the elevator. As the doors closed, she caught one last look at Philip through the glass wall of his borrowed corner office. He was on the phone, leaning back, satisfied. Tara stood next to his chair. They had no idea. The elevator descended from the 7th floor of the Weston Architecture Group building. The building her mother, Patricia Weston, had leased in 1998 when the firm had 4 employees and no major contracts. The building that Aubrey had helped grow into something worth $40 million on paper, which was exactly why Philip wanted it. But there was one thing Philip Crane had never bothered to find out. One detail he had skipped over in his rush to consolidate before acting. Patricia Weston had not left the firm equally to both daughters. She had left it to Aubrey, 62%, held in a structured trust administered by the family's estate attorney, a quiet man named Gerald Okafor, who had been her mother's lawyer for over 20 years. On paper, the arrangement looked like it would normalize into a standard co-ownership. But Gerald had built in a specific set of conditions at Patricia's direction. Conditions that activated only in the event that Aubrey was removed from leadership without cause, or if there was documented evidence of financial misconduct by a controlling officer. Aubrey had not known the full extent of this until 8 months ago, when she'd called Gerald the morning after she found Philip's draft termination documents on that shared drive. She had sat across from Gerald in his small office on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like paper and coffee. She had not cried. She had asked him to explain everything from the beginning, and he had. Your mother liked Philip well enough at first, Gerald told her, but she came to have doubts. She saw the way he positioned himself, the way he started making decisions without consulting you. She asked me to structure this carefully. 62%. Aubrey controlled the firm. Philip had never known because Gerald had never told him, and the documents were filed in a way that wouldn't surface unless someone was specifically looking. What do I need to do? Aubrey had asked. Document everything, Gerald said, and wait for him to move. So she had documented everything. She hired an investigator named Tomas Vega, a former forensic auditor who specialized in construction fraud and financial crimes. Over the following months, Tomas had built a file that was almost absurdly thorough. The kickbacks from the Denver LLC, the falsified zoning submissions on 3 separate projects, the vendor invoices that didn't match any real company, nearly $800,000, moved in increments small enough not to trigger automatic review. Aubrey had spent those months playing a role she had never wanted to play. She smiled at Philip in morning meetings. She cited him on emails without giving him anything he could use. She watched him build his confidence. Watched him start to believe that the firm was already his, that she was an obstacle rather than the answer to a question he hadn't thought to ask. She had told exactly one person. Her closest friend, a woman she had known since her first year of college, Renata Park. Renata was not in the architecture business. She ran a small events company, and had no stakes in any of this, which was precisely why Aubrey trusted her. He's going to regret this, Renata had said, after Aubrey walked her through everything in Renata's kitchen one night, both of them sitting on the counter because neither could be bothered to pull out chairs. When this lands, he is going to regret every single thing. I know, Aubrey had said, but I need it to land right. Now sitting in her car in the parking structure beneath the building, Aubrey pulled out her phone and called Gerald. It happened, she said when he picked up. He fired me in front of the full leadership team. End of business today, then we move tonight, Gerald said. I'll file the trust activation with the board first thing tomorrow morning. Emergency meeting is set for 8. Philip will receive formal notice before 6 a.m. and Tomas already sent the financial crimes report to the city attorney's office. They've been waiting for this. There's also a parallel complaint filed with the state licensing board regarding the Hargrove zoning documents. Aubrey exhaled. 8 months of careful deliberate work. Let's do it, she said. That night, she went to Renata's apartment instead of going home to the house she and her sister shared, or had shared, before everything had started to fall apart quietly and then all at once. She could not face the house tonight. Tomorrow would be different. Tonight she needed somewhere she could just exist without performing anything. Renata opened the door and didn't say a word. She just stepped aside and let Aubrey in. They sat on the couch with takeout containers between them and a show neither of them watched playing on the television. Aubrey told Renata about the conference room, about Philip's expression, about the walkout with the box of things she didn't care about. Tomorrow, Renata said, he's going to understand what he did. I know. Aubrey set her fork down. I just feel tired. Her phone buzzed. A text from Philip. No hard feelings. Business decisions are business decisions. Hope you land on your feet. She stared at it. No hard feelings. As if he hadn't spent the better part of a year trying to dismantle her position in her own mother's firm. As if he hadn't forged documents and paid kickbacks and convinced her sister, who Aubrey still didn't fully understand was complicit or just oblivious, to stay out of it. She showed the text to Renata. Don't respond, Renata said immediately. Let him have tonight. Let him think he won. Aubrey put the phone face down on the cushion. She was not hungry anymore, but she made herself eat. Tomorrow she needed to be present, precise, completely in control. She had earned what was coming. She just had to get through the night first. Aubrey arrived at the building at 7:45 the next morning. She wore the charcoal blazer her mother had bought her the day she made principal. She had not worn it in a year and a half. It still fit. The security desk looked confused when she walked through the door. Miss Weston, your access has been suspended. Check your system, she said. You should have new instructions from the board administrator. The guard frowned, clicked through something on his screen. His posture changed. I'm sorry, Ms. Weston, you're cleared. 7th floor. She took the elevator up. When the doors opened, the office had that particular quiet of a workday just beginning. Coffee being made, laptops opening. People noticed her immediately. Conversations stopped in the way conversations do when something is happening, and everyone can feel it but no one knows the shape of it yet. Aubrey walked directly to the large conference room. Through the glass she could already see several board members and Gerald, who had arrived early. She entered, took her seat at the head of the table. The seat Philip had occupied yesterday when he fired her, and waited. At 8:02, Philip walked off the elevator. She watched him through the glass. He was talking to Tara, gesturing about something, phone in his other hand. Then he looked toward the conference room and went still. He came in without knocking. "What is this?" His voice was controlled, but she heard the edge beneath it. "Who called a board meeting?" "I did," Aubrey said. "You don't have standing to." "She does," said Gerald. He stood and opened the folder in front of him. "Mr. Crane, I need to inform you of some things regarding the ownership structure of Weston Architecture Group." What followed was methodical and thorough. Gerald walked the board through the trust documents. Tomas's financial report was distributed, 1 copy per seat. The zoning complaint was referenced. By the time Philip said that's not possible, his voice had lost its certainty entirely. "Your mother-in-law structured this very deliberately," Gerald said to him evenly. "She never fully trusted that the firm would be protected without it. Aubrey holds 62% of Weston Architecture Group. You hold 21. The remaining 17 is distributed among the board." Philip looked at Aubrey, really looked at her in a way he hadn't in months. "You knew," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I've known since last October," she said. "Since before you filed those fabricated performance reports. Since before the Hargrove submission." The room was very quiet. "I don't know what you think you." $800,000, Aubrey said. "Through 4 different vendor accounts that don't correspond to any registered business entity. I have the bank records, the LLC filings, the emails." Tomas Vega spent 6 months building this file. The city attorney's office has a copy as of this morning. She began distributing documents around the table. Nobody spoke. Philip's lawyer, a man who had arrived 2 minutes earlier looking confused, was now reading with an expression that suggested he was already calculating how quickly he could distance himself. "I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Philip Crane from his position as managing director," Aubrey said, "and to open a formal investigation into the Hargrove zoning filings and the vendor accounts. All in favor?" Every hand on the board went up. Gerald read the motion into the record. Philip sat down heavily in his chair. "Aubrey," he started. "Listen, we can talk about this. There are ways to handle this that don't have to." "There aren't," she said. "You forged documents on active projects. You stole from this firm. You walked me out of my mother's company with security on either side of me." She paused. "End of business," she said quietly. "That's how long you gave me. I'm extending you the same courtesy." He left without his box. The next several weeks felt like learning to breathe again after a long time of shallow air. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. The city attorney's office had been tracking similar schemes in the construction sector, and Philip's case connected to 2 others. Tomas's documentation was, according to the lead investigator, among the cleanest they had received. Charges were filed within 6 weeks. The state licensing board opened a parallel process regarding the falsified zoning submissions. Philip's architectural license was suspended pending the outcome. Without it, he could not legally work in the field. The firm's internal audit turned up additional damage. Vendor relationships that had been deliberately strained. Clients who had been underbilled in ways that looked generous, but were actually structured to make the firm dependent on Philip's relationships for renewals. It was more sophisticated than it had first appeared, and untangling it took time. Hugh Calloway became the interim director of client relations while Aubrey stabilized the leadership structure. Dominic moved into a project lead role he had been quietly passed over for twice under Philip's oversight. Gerald came in twice a week for the first month. "You're not just fixing the operations," Gerald told her one afternoon. "You're restoring trust. That's a different kind of work." "I know," Aubrey said. "My mother understood that. She always said the firm was only as good as the people in it." The harder conversation was with her sister. Claudia had not known everything. Aubrey had sat with that for a long time before she decided she believed it. What Claudia had known was that Philip was pushing to have Aubrey removed from day-to-day leadership. She had told herself it was a business decision. She had let it happen. They met for dinner 6 weeks after everything broke open. They sat across from each other in a restaurant they had gone to as kids. The kind of place that had not changed since the 90s. Claudia looked like she hadn't slept properly since October. "I should have stopped him," Claudia said. "Yes," Aubrey said. "I didn't want to see it, I know." They sat with that for a while. The food came and they ate it slowly. "Mom would have known what to say to us right now," Claudia said eventually. "Mom would have told us not to let a man divide us," Aubrey said. "She was very specific about that. She said it at least 4 times and I thought she was being dramatic." Claudia laughed and then her eyes filled. She knew, she always knew. The road back was not straight. Claudia filed for divorce 3 months later. She was not charged with anything. The investigation found no evidence she had been directly involved in the financial scheme. She moved into a smaller apartment across the city and started coming around the office again, carefully, offering to help where she could without overstepping. It took another several months before Aubrey trusted it, but she got there. Philip's criminal case resolved 8 months after the charges were filed. He accepted a plea agreement. Guilty on 2 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of filing false municipal documents. He was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison, full restitution of the stolen funds plus penalties, and a permanent revocation of his architectural license. The morning of the sentencing, Aubrey drove to the courthouse alone. She had been asked to provide a victim impact statement, and she had said yes without hesitating. She had written it out longhand the night before, at the kitchen table in her apartment, the one she had rented 2 months ago when she decided she wanted a space that was entirely hers. Something that had not been shaped by anyone else's decisions. She read it from the stand with Philip 6 feet away and not looking at her. She talked about her mother, who had built the firm before Aubrey was old enough to understand what it was. About the years she had spent growing it, the clients she had personally maintained, the staff she had recruited and mentored, and in some cases, convinced to stay when other offers came. She talked about what it had felt like to walk out of that building with a box of props, while the people she had worked alongside for 11 years watched from their desks. She talked about what it meant to betray trust. Not just the financial trust, though that was real and documented and would be repaid, but the slower, quieter kind of trust that made a workplace function. The kind that once broken required years to rebuild. "I am not asking for a specific outcome today," she said near the end of her statement. "I am asking for accountability. Because the people who work at Weston Architecture Group, the ones who came in every day and did their jobs and trusted that leadership was doing the same, they deserve to know that what happened to them had consequences, that it was not acceptable, that it will not happen again." When she stepped down and returned to her seat, Hugh, who had come without being asked, reached over and put a hand briefly on her shoulder. She nodded. The judge sentenced Philip to the full range. His lawyer looked like he had expected better. Outside the courthouse, Renata was waiting. "How do you feel?" Renata asked. Aubrey thought about it seriously. "Like it's over," she said. "Like I can breathe in a direction that isn't backward." Renata pulled her into a hug. "Good. That's good." Gerald was there too, a few steps back. He clasped his hands and smiled at her in the way he had. She realized, since she was a child visiting her mother's office on school half-days, "Patricia would have been proud of you," he said. She already was. But she would have been proud of this specifically. Aubrey blinked. She managed not to cry until she was in the car. The firm took time, but it took it well. She made changes she had wanted to make for years: transparent compensation reviews, an anonymous reporting structure that actually went somewhere. She brought in a senior associate from a Chicago firm who specialized in public infrastructure projects, a market segment Weston had always been well positioned for but had never fully pursued. Within 8 months, they had landed 2 contracts that represented more combined revenue than any single year under Philip's oversight. She also started something she had been thinking about quietly for a long time, a mentorship program that connected mid-career women in the building trades with established practitioners for monthly advisory sessions. It was small at first, 12 people in the first cohort, but the response was disproportionate to the size and, within a year, she was fielding requests from other cities about replicating it. She met Oliver Marsh at the 3rd session of that program. He was not a participant. He was there because one of the mentors had brought him as a guest, a structural engineer who wanted to learn how the program worked. He had sat in the back and not said much, but afterward he had asked her a question about the selection criteria that was actually good. The kind of questions that showed he had been paying attention. They talked for 20 minutes in the parking lot. He was easy to be around in a way that surprised her. They had coffee 2 weeks later, then a dinner that lasted 3 hours. He told her about his work, a small firm he had started after leaving a larger one, projects he cared about for reasons that had nothing to do with their size. She told him about the last 2 years, not the performed version she used in professional settings but the real one. The one that included the nights she had sat in her car in that parking garage, wondering if she had calculated wrong, if she had waited too long, if she had trusted too much in her mother's foresight. He listened the way people listen when they are actually thinking about what you're saying, not waiting to respond. "Your mother sounds extraordinary," he said. "She was practical," Aubrey said. "She didn't use big words about things. She just did the work and she built something that lasted. That was her version of extraordinary. Sounds like she raised someone's the same way." She didn't know what to do with that, so she changed the subject, but she thought about it later. They took it slowly. Aubrey had spent 2 years in survival mode and she needed to ease into anything new without pressure. Oliver seemed to understand this without requiring an explanation, which was itself something worth noticing. Philip was released from federal custody 14 months into his sentence, having completed his term with standard reduction. Aubrey heard about it from Gerald, who had received notification as part of the legal record. She felt nothing significant about it. He would be paying restitution for the next decade. His license was gone permanently. Whatever he built from here would be built from far further back than he had ever expected to be standing. She did not look him up. There was no version of that search that added anything to her life. Tara, who had been his assistant and had turned out to have had some awareness of the vendor accounts, received a lesser charge and a short probationary sentence. She left the city. Aubrey did not know where she went and did not particularly need to. What Aubrey thought about instead was the firm, and the mentorship program, which had grown to 4 cities by the end of its second year, and her sister, with whom she was slowly, carefully rebuilding something that felt more honest than what they'd had before, which had always been slightly performed on both sides. She thought about Oliver, who had started dropping by the office occasionally with no particular reason, just to say hello, which was transparently obvious, and which she chose not to comment on because she found she didn't mind. She thought about her mother. On the 3rd anniversary of the trust activation, which was also approximately the anniversary of the day her life had been most clearly not her own, Aubrey went back to the building her mother had leased in 1998. She stood in front of it for a few minutes. It looked the same as it always had, the kind of building that doesn't announce itself, brick and large windows and a small plaque beside the door. Inside, the firm was running a morning she had designed. The mentorship cohort was in the East Conference Room. The Chicago infrastructure team was presenting to a municipal client in the large room on 6. Dominic was in the field. Hugh was on a call. She went up to her office, her mother's old office which she had reclaimed and repainted in the same quiet gray her mother had always used, and sat down at her desk. Her phone showed a text from Oliver. "Good morning, how are you?" She smiled. "Better than I expected to be," she typed back, which has kind of become my answer to that question. His response came quickly. "That's a very good answer." She set the phone down and looked at the framed rendering on the wall. Her mother's first completed project, a community center in a neighborhood neither of them had grown up in, small and functional and, her mother had always noted, still standing was enough. Still standing was in fact everything. Aubrey opened her laptop and started the day.